morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR and welcome back to another video. So with the highly anticipated Pokemon Diamond and Pearl remakes finally being announced, I thought that now would be a great time to go over some past Pokemon remakes and what separates those games from the originals. Now, I did do this to a certain degree in my Pokemon Generation review series a couple of years back, but this is more about highlighting the differences than reviewing the games as a whole. And what better games to start with than Firered and Leafgreen, the first remakes in the series. More than likely, if people enjoyed this, I'm going to turn it into a mini-series where I go over the other remakes, so if that's something that floats your boat, then make sure you subscribe and you'll see that exactly when it comes out. Yes, we may have passed 100,000 subscribers, but apparently 90% of you still aren't subscribed, so think about that. We could be at 1 million. But it's okay, take your time, I'll still be here in your recommended videos tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. So, Pokemon Fire Red had the tall task of recreating the original Pokemon games Red and Green and adapting them to the modern day. Well, 2004, not quite the modern day. Gen 3 was a turbulent time in the Pokemon community, when is it not, since it was a period of great change. So these games could serve as a nice little bridge between the new and the old. And so, we got what could possibly be the safest remakes in the series, at least so far. These games are very faithful to the originals in terms of story and progression, perhaps too faithful, some may argue. It's about as accurate as you can get, right down to the NPC text spoken in the most secluded areas. But it does raise some questions for newcomers to the series, such as, why can't I evolve my Golbat to Crobat during the main story? Why is it such a lengthy process just to unlock trading between these games and Ruby and Sapphire? Why are there no allusions to the Johto region, which should be right next door, except for this one random line about Lance's cousin from somewhere far away? Bro, it's right there. Though it would have been nice to have access to these things right away, I get why they didn't do it in the main story, particularly when it comes to trading with Hoenn and evolving into Gen 2 Pokemon such as Crobat, Scizor, Espeon, Porygon 2, or others. There's just this weird thing about the original 151 Pokemon. Though in this game it may as well be 150 because there's no Mew glitch anymore. But regardless of whether it's 150 or 151, it's just something that a lot of people remember fondly. It's an iconic number from a simpler time. It's one that people are constantly coming back to, even now when we have nearly 900 Pokemon. While I think it certainly would have been better for the games to introduce these Gen 2 evolutions during the main story just to give you more options and better type balance, especially considering Dark and Steel now exist, I get the significance between the Kanto 150 thing. It's like a cultural staple for Kanto. That being said, I do wish these games had done more with changing the Pokemon variety a bit, especially on the early routes where it feels like you encounter the same dozen Pokemon for half the game. It's also a bit disappointing that there are a few more version-exclusive Pokemon this time around. It doesn't really lend itself to great team building. I would say that they actually handled most of the gym leaders' teams pretty well though. A lot of the changes that Yellow made, like giving Lieutenant Surge a singular Raichu, making Erica's ace Gloom instead of Vileplume, giving Koga 3 Venonats, and giving Sabrina a level 50 Abra while abandoning the rest of her actually interesting team, weren't changes that would work here. Yes, I know it was all for the anime, it worked for Yellow, but I'm glad it wasn't implemented here. I think Fire Red and Leaf Green are the only remakes that are better off not incorporating changes that the enhanced version made. The only dumb part was nerfing Giovanni's Rhydon in the gym battle to a Rhyhorn. It's the last gym, why are you putting the training wheels back on? This wasn't even a Yellow thing. Giovanni had Rhydon in Red and Green, granted it was a much worse move pool that would not work in Generation 3 at all, but still, there's an easy way around that. To make it worse, his ace Rhyhorn in the remakes just copy and paste the moves from this weaker Rhyhorn that he leads with. It's the same Pokemon, just 5 levels higher, which means it still sucks. Who directed this game? Yeah, that checks out. The biggest notable addition to this game is the Sevi Islands, which drastically improves upon the post-game of the originals, though it's pretty generous to call just catching Mewtwo the post-game. However, the Sevi Islands actually first show up after defeating Blaine, where Bill shows up to personally chauffeur you there. I know a lot of people loathe this part of the game since it essentially kills the pacing of your journey towards the Pokemon League and replaces it with a monotonous series of chores that feels like the equivalent of an anime filler arc that also takes place on a series of islands. Hey, I've seen this show before! But it's not the worst intrusion in the world. Could it have been shorter and not involve a whopping 3 different islands that could have been saved for the post-game instead? Sure, but at the very least it addresses the pretty stark level jump from the original games and gives you some new trainers to grind on instead of overheating your Versus Seeker on Cycling Road. Speaking of which, Versus Seeker wasn't even in the original games, which meant once you beat the game, that's it, you're done, no more battling for you. This is a very good and often overlooked improvement. Getting back to the Sevi Islands though, it also gives Moltres a more suitable place to be caught during the main story instead of just haphazardly dumping him in the middle of Victory Road like the originals did. That always just seemed so random to me considering Zapdos and Articuno got their own distinct locations, and Mount Ember certainly keeps with the theme of exploring out-of-the-way areas and being rewarded for it. This is a well-designed area that feels like it meshes with the rest of the game. Victory Road isn't an out-of-the-way location that you want to explore, it's an obstacle that you have to get through, and more than likely you just so happen to stumble across Moltres along the way and realized, gee, I'm already running pretty low on potions and revives, maybe this isn't the best time to be fighting a legendary bird. For that alone, I think the Sevi Islands being introduced during the main story is pretty justified, plus it gives you something to look forward to after you've beaten the league since now you know there's extra content in the game. The only major differences left to discuss are just the general mechanic changes made between Gen 1 and Gen 3. Obviously, Firered and Leafgreen themselves don't have much to do with this since these changes were already made in either Gen 2 or Ruby and Sapphire, but they are probably more appreciated here than in any other remake. Some of the very annoying glitches and mechanics that made battles incredibly frustrating in Gen 1 just due to their sheer brokenness, the move Wrap notably comes to mind, and speed-based one-hit KO moves, have all been patched up rather cleanly here. Ghost types, which were coded incorrectly in Gen 1 to not be super effective against Psychic types, has also been fixed here, which is a rather big deal considering how overpowering that type is in Kanto. I don't think there's any doubt that these games are considerably more polished than the originals. The only downside to this is, as I mentioned earlier, the removal of Mew from the game. I understand having to perform a glitch to get certain content is probably a worse look in a 21st century game compared to a 1990s video game, but it does remove some of the intrigue and curiosity that the original games had. They kind of make an attempt at this in the post-game with some weird mysteries scattered throughout the Sevi Islands, like the Unknown at Tenobi Ruins, the Lost Cave, the Dotted Hole, and the Memorial Pillar, but most of these either have no payoff or are very insignificant. The only real point to the islands is to catch a Gen 2 Pokemon and establish the trading link between Kanto and Hoenn. Again, I want to reiterate that I'm glad the Sevi Islands exist in the first place since it's far better than just not having a post-game at all, but it's undeniably disappointing at various points. Except the Archer and Oriana stuff and the reference to Silver. That was pretty cool and it at least established more of a link between these games and the Johto region, even though everyone pretends that it just doesn't exist. Oh, and this is probably a great chance to talk about the music. The Sevi Islands are great alone for giving us these GBA versions of Johto music that we wouldn't have otherwise heard. It stands out a lot from the other remixes in the games. Personally, I think Firered and Leafgreen's soundtrack is at its peak in those creepier areas like Viridian Forest, Power Plant, Pokemon Mansion, and the Rocket HQ. Something about the sound font is just perfect for conveying the unsettling vibe of those areas. Don't even get me started on the champion theme, straight fire. Sounds like they were getting absolutely everything they could out of that poor Game Boy speaker, and it's a phenomenal transformation from that original 8-bit style. Everything else just sounds okay in my opinion. It's not bad, just nothing that I would get excited to hear. Overall, Pokemon Firered and Leafgreen is a fine remake. Sure, it could have pushed the envelope a little more in some areas to give us a fresher style. These are notably the last games that will have any kind of a focus on legendary Pokemon in the main story since that became the norm starting with Ruby and Sapphire. Would it have been cool to get an expanded Mewtwo story? Yeah, it definitely would have. But I can't fault it for not being there, it's clearly just trying to be an accurate recreation of the original Red and Green, and in that department it passes with flying colors. Plus, I just think it's better to judge this game for what it is and not what it could have been. I think the only thing that you could truly argue against this game is the lack of cool tricks like the Mew glitch. If you're someone who's more into breaking down game code, finding cool secrets, seeing how it ticks, and making creepypastas to spread online and scare a bunch of 8-year-old children, then yeah, you'd probably prefer Red and Green, but other than that, I think this could be seen as a universal upgrade. For fans of Kanto, it might leave you wanting a tiny bit more, since the only real addition is the Sevi Islands, which doesn't bring a ton of memorable content to the table, but as a remake, it's definitely satisfactory. It's not missing anything big. But if you're someone who's looking for a bit more new content in a remake, then hang on, because our next two pairs of games are certainly a bit more ambitious. But that will do it for my comparison of Firered and Leafgreen to their original counterparts. Thank you so much for watching, and again, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And leave a like if you enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time.